Alright, what is up, dudes? I've just had G Fuel mixed with Redline and I'm ready to do this review. This is going to be of Deep Chaos 4 Flow Bearing and Ark Bahamut 2 Bump Atomic. These two Beyblades were originally released together in the God customized set of November 2017, I want to say. And recently Deep Chaos has gotten a re-release in the Random Layer Collection 9 and Ark Bahamut in Random Booster 11 with Vice Leopard. Yeah, let's talk about all the different parts. I'm going to be doing both of these at once because they were released at the same time. So up first is going to be Deep Chaos. First of all, the layer is called Deep Chaos. Its God gimmick is supposed to be that it's got springs in the layer. Can't really get a good look at them in this lighting with this camera either. Let me see. That's a little better. Yeah, if you see that little circle thing, the white circle, that's the spring. It's basically got a spring-loaded layer, and when it's hit, it's supposed to like compress down and then bounce back up to deflect attacks. It does work to a degree, but not quite as well as it's supposed to, because I've noticed that while other combos on like Revolve and Eternal are pretty susceptible to getting smash attacked by Twin Nemesis, Deep Chaos isn't, which is probably a sign that the gimmick is working against it to some extent. Deep Chaos also has, it might still actually currently have the best stamina in the game. Archer Hercules is also pretty good. Emperor Fornius can be good if you have a good mold. Hell Salamander is left spin, so that kind of counts, but not really. But yeah, Deep Chaos 7 Revolve was a pretty standard stamina combo for a while. It could outspin Maximum Garuda, it could outspin a bunch of other things. Apparently, if you have a super good balance when you can outspin some like Drain Fafnir Atomic combos, but I never experienced that even after I got a good balance Deep Chaos 7 Revolve. The issue is that compared to all the Super Z layers, it's kind of light now, and it's a lot more prone to bursting than Archer Hercules, where I tried Deep Chaos Revolve versus Archer Hercules Revolve, Deep Chaos Eternal versus Archer Hercules Eternal, basically mirror matches between the two, and most of the time it was pretty even between them. But because Archer Hercules is a little harder to KO, or a lot harder to KO because being so heavy and harder to burst, it is basically outclassed Deep Chaos at this point, unfortunately. But it's not a bad layer, even though Archer Hercules is more accessible. Deep Chaos is still usable to some extent. And then the disc for Deep Chaos is 4 Flow. 4 has been released a whole bunch of times. It's probably, I want to say, the most common core disc. And it's not bad, it's decent for stamina, okay burst resistance. It's okay for attack too, but it's mainly outclassed by 7 and 5 also, I think, because 4 and 5 seem pretty even stamina wise, but 5 has a little more burst resistance than 4 does, and 5 also has a completely smooth underside while 4 does not, meaning that 5 can be used instead of 7 or 10 for the bottom of a combo without a frame, for use with like Life After Death with Eternal or Revolve or Bearing, while 4 doesn't really do that as well. And then the frame is Flow. Most of the time it's not used very often. I know King Lufa uses this frame a lot, and he's number one in America, so that probably says something. But it probably increases like same spin stamina by a bit. I'm not sure if that trade-off is worth the Life After Death you would get from Cross, or yeah, I'm not sure if it's a more useful frame in right spin than cross, or in left spin than glaive, or just not using a frame on some combos. Like, I would rather use 7 bearing or 7 revolve rather than 7 flow on either of those. But for some people it works. I know he was outspinning Hell Salamander something, or 7 cross atomic with Hell Salamander 7 flow atomic, so it might beat those in same spin when life after death isn't really a factor. And then bearing. Wow, what happened to this thing? It used to spin more freely. The humidity. But either way, bearing is probably the most sought after part from Deep Chaos. It is like basically bearing drive or bearing core. You can see it's got a little bearing inside the driver. And the tip is actually made of POM, which is, it's like polyoxymethylene or something, some long compound name that I don't remember because everyone just calls it POM for short. And basically it's got probably some of the best stamina in same spin and opposite spin, but the drawback is that its spring is actually super weak. Like, they legitimately have a different color spring. It's a black spring, which is weaker than the standard springs. And I know there's a gold spring in like Extreme Plus or whatever that's coming. That's supposed to be stronger. Oops. But either way, bearing is basically unbeatable in opposite spin. Like, you won't be able to outspin bearing in opposite spin unless you have another bearing, or maybe a really good destroy or a really good hold, or unless like you're using EF bearing and it's a bad EF or something. I don't know. It's practically you're not going to outspin bearing in opposite spin. And in same spin, it's also pretty tough to outspin, even though atomic can destabilize it. Bearing loses to atomic in same spin most of the time. I'm not sure about Eternal or Revolve. I think a lot of the reasons that people think those beat it is because they can't launch bearing at full strength in same spin, because there's always the risk that you'll burst just because of the weak spring. It's a very, I think, well balanced part, just between like being borderline unbeatable in opposite spin, but also being like so risky to use. It's kind of like Death Scyther was. It's so risky to use, but it's good if you use it right. So overall, Deep Chaos 4-flow bearing. I mean, that triple booster set's coming out pretty soon with Wolborg, and that might be a better way to pick up bearing than this set was. Probably because this is getting pretty expensive, but and Deep Chaos is getting kind of outclassed at this point. So it might not be worth getting anymore. It's still not a bad combo though. It's actually pretty good stock. So and then moving on to Ark Bahamut, the other Beyblade that's new in the set. And first up, the layers Ark Bahamut. It's notorious for having probably like the second worst teeth in the game behind Maximum Garuda. But it is left spin, so that means you can weak launch it against the majority of things and it will not burst as much. Basically, the gimmick is supposed to be this like turquoise shield thing underneath. If you see those 4 tabs, the disc is supposed to go in between those, and how it's supposed to work is that as it loses clicks, these will line up and form like a perfect circle. But that doesn't really work because they kind of don't extend out beyond the actual contact points of the layer, so it's just mainly for aesthetic purposes. But yeah, in the usefulness of Ark Bahamut is kind of like, it was once a subject that was up for debate. It definitely has better raw stamina than Drain Fafnir did. However, it bursts so much more in same spin, so a lot of people were using Ark Bahamut on like Atomic or Destroy as like a Drain Fafnir substitute where it worked okay. The only problem is that it just didn't stand as much of a chance against Lost Longinus or Nightmare Longinus or Bloody Longinus as Drain Fafnir did, just because the teeth were so bad it was easier to burst. But apparently there's some like variation in the layer. If you've ever unboxed a plastic Beyblade and put it together, you'll notice that sometimes when you, I guess, twist the parts off the little molding rack that they come in, like it's a modeling kit, and you'll notice that there's some, there's like a little piece that's stuck to it, that's where it attached and it's kind of left over. Apparently sometimes there's issues with Ark Bahamut where that piece is still on one of these parts, and that makes it sticky, and that makes this part so much harder to move, which the teeth will stay the same, but it just makes the disc harder to move, so it just doesn't burst as often. I know it's been an issue with some of them. And Alta, some guy from California, he has a super weird Ark Bahamut. Like, the teeth are so bad that when he uses it on bearing, it is pretty much unburstable. I've actually gone up against this myself using like combos that are designed to burst things, like Longinus on Weight, on Orbit, on Eternal, and I couldn't burst it at all. It hardly ever lost a click either. He claims it's because that it's so loose that when it gets hit, it actually will regain clicks. I'm not sure if that's true or even like possible in the same spin, but I have no way to prove it either way. So I that's what he says. But yeah, either way, it's been pretty much overshadowed by Hell Salamander at this point. There's no reason to use Drain Fafnir, Hell Salamander, or even like Spriggan Requiem, or Drain Fafnir, Ark Bahamut, or even Spriggan Requiem with Hell Salamander in the game right now, just because it does the same thing. The teeth are better, and it's so much heavier than all the other ones. The disc is 2 bump. 2 is, it's good for lining up with C Excalibur combos and sometimes Twin Nemesis combos, but it's becoming kind of light now compared to things like 7, 0, 10, even 4 and 5 I think are heavier than it, so it's kind of fallen out of use except for a few niche uses. So not a very useful disc anymore, but it's not bad by any means. Yeah, I like using 2 Cross with C Excalibur, but C Excalibur is also kind of falling out of use now. So I don't know if it'll have much use. Maybe it will with the new Buster Excalibur coming out soon, but who knows. And then the frame bump is probably one of the most overrated frames in the whole game. Just because, or it's the most overrated frame in the whole Beyblade game at this point, because it's the heaviest and people think heavier will automatically mean better, but it's been like common knowledge since the plastic generation that weight, distribution, and life after death are more important than just raw weight. And like the half a gram you get from using bump over something like cross or glaive isn't really going to be a significant amount of difference. But basically, bump will give you the most weight, or I think lift is actually heavier now, but lift is like an even more bad shape than bump is, so it scrapes more. It'll like kill your stamina faster. I don't even know if people are gonna start using lift over bump. If they do, I'll be like kind of disappointed in them, but oh well. But anyways, bump just basically adds weight to your disc. There was a time using like Spriggan Requiem and Deep Chaos on bearing that if your combo was well balanced enough, that putting bump underneath instead of just using like 7 or 0 would make it so the combo didn't fall over. It would just lower the center of gravity enough so where it didn't fall over. But now that the layers like Hell Salamander, Archer Hercules, and Emperor Fornius are a lot heavier, the Beyblades are more top heavy, and putting bump underneath isn't going to do much, and you're better off just using 7 without a frame. Unless, I don't know, maybe 7 glaive is better than 7 in left spin. I know 7's better than 7 cross on right spin though. But yeah, because of that, people started putting bump on like destroy or atomic, even though cross and glaive and polish, if you still want to use polish is technically the best in opposite spin, but it's light compared to the other ones. So it's also not very good in same spin just because it'll scrape earlier. But yeah, glaive, cross, and polish are all better for atomic and destroy than bump is, but people just keep using bump for some reason. Glaive will beat bump in opposite spin, cross beats, or if glaive is in left spin and bump is in right spin, glaive will win. Cross would probably beat it in both directions. They only tried left spin bump versus right spin cross. But yeah, don't use bump on atomic, don't use bump on destroy. Use cross or glaive instead. It's still a good frame if you know you're not going to be trying to outspin anything. Like I can see people using bump for attack or bump for like KO defense. Some guy was actually using at this recent tournament I went to, they were using Vice Leopard 7 bump unite as a KO defense combo, and it was actually working pretty well. Like I was struggling to beat it with winning Valkyrie on extreme. So definitely still a useful part. I was using Alter Chrono's 7 bump unite as a KO defense combo before Vice Leopard came out. A useful part, just nowhere near as like universally applicable as everyone seems to think it is. And then atomic is honestly probably still the best driver in the game right now. It's got a pretty good amount of life after death precession actually, meaning that it will spin a long time in opposite spin, it'll stay up because of this ring, and if you have like the proper disc to support it, then it will outspin most things in opposite spin. It loses to Eternal, Destroy, Octa, and Bearing in opposite spin, and it will, I think it beats all of those in same spin. The only thing it might not beat in same spin is Eternal would be my guess, because Eternal might be too short for it to destabilize, because sorry about that, my camera ran out of memory, so I had to dump the videos I had. But either way, what I was saying was that atomic is probably like the best driver in the game as a balance between same spin and opposite spin performance. It's really tough to outspin in same spin unless you have maybe Eternal, or possibly even like defense could beat it, just because defense is a ball shape. Orbit might be able to beat it. Eternal, just because it's so short that it would be difficult to destabilize with atomic. But aside from that, it'll outspin pretty much anything in same spin. In opposite spin, it loses to other stuff, but it's still good enough to beat most things. Yeah, Hell Salamander 0 bump atomic, or not bump, that's just what everyone uses. Hell Salamander 7 or 0, or maybe 10 glaive atomic. Archer Hercules 7 cross atomic. I don't know if Eternal would be better for that. Emperor Fornius 7 cross atomic. Revive Phoenix on atomic might be decent, but I haven't seen like Revive Phoenix do anything very consistently. Yeah, basically you can make anything decent by putting 7 cross atomic on it, to be completely honest. That's kind of how the meta is right now, but atomic is just a great driver. I think it's still probably the best driver in the game. It used to have like a noticeably weaker spring than other things like orbit, yielding, just pretty much all other drivers. Outside of just like normal spring tightness variations, it was noticeably looser. But it's not as bad as Bearing is for that. And most of the Super Z layers that it's used on now are so heavy that they don't need to bother using something with a tighter spring. They're hard enough to burst on their own that Atomic will generally work fine on them, and you don't have to worry about it. So I guess in that sense, Atomic is more or less completely outclassed Orbit, because it will usually outspin it in the same spin, it will outspin it in opposite spin, and the decrease in burst resistance isn't as noticeable anymore with the heavier layers. So, overall, Deep Chaos and Ark Bahamut were both released in the Super Z, the God customized set, which was probably like a must-buy set at the time. It had 7. It had Deep Chaos. It had Atomic. It had Bearing. It had Bump. It just had like a bunch of really useful parts, but Bearing's about to get a re-released. Deep Chaos and Ark Bahamut have re-releases, even though they're both kind of outclassed. Bump has had several re-releases. I think it's in Screw Trident, it's in Random Booster 10. I think there's another way to get it now too, outside of a limited edition. Atomic's had a ton of re-releases since then, but no real guaranteed cheap way to get it. It's always been in a set or a random booster, so make of that what you will. But the chances are that you probably have a Takara Tomy Atomic by now. So overall, this set was once a must-buy, but now with the set exclusive parts becoming more available or outclassed, it's become less so. Either way, though, it still might be a solid buy compared to the triple booster set, because it will probably have better layers. Like, Zed Achilles isn't that good. Wolborg is probably going to suck, because if it's as light as the other plastics layers, then it's going to be bad. And Hazard Kirbyus seems like a worse Emperor Fornius, from what I've heard. Like, even if you have a super tight one, its stamina isn't that great. So like, it could maybe be used exclusively against left spin on Bearing, but aside from that, the God customized set has better layers. But overall, I think up next is actually Spriggan Requiem, which is probably the most hyped release of the God series ever since it was announced, and people think it's not. It was fake because it doesn't sound like a Beyblade's name. But I will see you guys then with a special introduction.